Mushrooms have always captivated me a little bit more than plants. 30 pounds in an afternoon of just prime porcini buttons, easily. The trick with it is to cook them frozen.
Orion, welcome to the Year of Plenty podcast, man. How's it going?
Good, good. Thank you for having me.
Totally. I've actually had a few podcast listeners now tell me I should have you on a podcast. So I thought it was about time, especially now with, fall mushrooms happening and the foraging season in general kind of coming to an end, I would say, for the most part. There's always some stuff to find in the winter, but sadly, we're nearing the end of the seasons, I would say, for most people, unless you're like living in Florida or something.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate the recommendations from whoever made them.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here. Yeah, the seasons do, especially in Colorado where I am, they start to wrap up by like late September, early October, at least all of the stuff that I'm most interested in.
Yeah, huge bummer. It's like, I also hunt, so like I'm getting excited about hunting season right now, but it's always like crushing when the foraging season ends for me, at least. But at least it's like, you got several months to do it, whereas hunting is like, you got in Montana here where I am, 2 months, usually in some states only like a week. So at least we can forage for most of the year.
Yeah, that's how we are here. I also hunt. I've got a week this year to try to fill my tag. So
nice. I didn't know you hunted. That's pretty sweet. You do
I do
deer,
it all.
elk?
I'm doing elk this year, but I do pretty much anything interests me in that, like the wild food realm. I started with fishing. So fishing was kind of the first wild food that I was interested in. And then mushrooming quickly after that, and plants and hunting kind of was last. So
yeah. Well, that's very similar for me. Fishing is like kind of I feel like the easiest. You just go get a rod, cast a worm, right? And most fish are edible. You don't have to worry too much about identification or anything there. But, just for people who might not know who you are, it'd be great if you could just give us like a little backstory on yourself, how you got into foraging specifically, and then like what it's all about for you.
For sure. So I'm Orion. I own Forage Colorado, which is a kind of a multifaceted business of outdoor and wild food education. I do a lot online, write articles, make content, teach private classes locally and events and stuff. So that's kind of, how I got into this whole world professionally.
Yeah.
I got started with foraging pretty young. There's like one moment when I was about 10 that sort of was this like the solidifying moment for me. But as I sort of look back in time, I realized that I've kind of really been learning this stuff most of my life. My dad taught us kind of all the plants and trees that were growing around our property where I grew up in New Mexico. So I just sort of like knew everything around me as a kid. Just like I sort of took it for granted, but I knew what a lilac was, and I knew what a pinyon pine was, and that pine nuts came from it. And I would climb the plum tree in our front yard and eat the plums when they were ripe. And we had some apple trees and some wild asparagus, and all of those things that were just like normal for me, are apparently not normal for everyone. And so I grew up in that atmosphere. But when I was 10, we went on a mushroom hunt with some family friends, and that was sort of like the one that became the core memory for me. We went out to the mountains of northern New Mexico looking for porcinis, chanterelles, hawkswings, and a few other edible species that they knew, but those were the main three. And we had a really great monsoon season that year, and I just remember, like coming home with bags and bags of mushrooms and just like having a blast out there in the mountains, picking amongst the spruce and fir trees. And so that sort of led me on this path and led us, my family, on this path of like going mushroom hunting at least once a year, sort of like our annual trip. And I started getting more interested in what other species were edible, and that guided me to that, and my love of the outdoors and fishing guided me to studying natural resource management at CSU in Fort Collins. And I started adding the scientific background and getting more interested in plants at that point. And in 2015, I started Forage Colorado, initially as a community to bring together people that were interested in foraging. And it quickly became me teaching others because it was sort of a very new thing at that time still.
Yeah, that's about the time when I got really serious with it too. And there was not much content at all out there. I would say, the Facebook foraging groups were kind of starting. And I think, if I remember correctly, you ran the Colorado Facebook foraging group for a bit, or you were like an admin, right?
Yeah, so that's it, and I shouldn't say it wasn't like foraging was new then. The online foraging was new at that point.
Yeah.
To be clear, foraging's been going on forever and forever and ever. But yeah, I was heavily involved in the Colorado Mycological Society Facebook group. That's kind of where I really got my start with Colorado mushrooms, helping people identify, learning myself. Mushrooms have always captivated me a little bit more than plants, just because that's kind of where I started, and I find them so fascinating. And so I really sort of lean in a little bit further into the mycology side of this realm instead of just edible. So I can identify a ton of mushrooms in Colorado, many of which are not edible. Um, but yeah, I ran that, and then I've started and run a few other groups as well. Still,
Yeah. Those foraging groups are such a great resource, I think. There's a lot of shit talking that goes on there as well. But I think
Facebook.
overall, yeah, Facebook. Overall, it's just such a good resource. Like usually for plants, my process is like I go, take a bunch of pictures in the field, look on like a plant ID app, and then from there I go to the books and the foraging groups and whatnot. So it's pretty cool that, yeah, that those exist. And it's awesome that you were so involved with that at the beginning. Getting the word about foraging out there. And it's really cool to hear that you got started so early. I think that's pretty special. Like you said, it's not normal for a lot of people, I think, but it is awesome when you have parents that really introduce you to nature like that. And I hope to do the same one day for my kids once I have them. How old are you now?
34.
34. Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if you got any plans there anytime soon, but maybe for me, my goal is kind of next 5 years or so. So I'm looking forward to doing that, to getting them into the wild foods and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's definitely something that, I sort of didn't realize growing up because it's just that was my world. But yeah, looking back on it, immediately I was able to recognize plants individually in, the wilderness, the forest around me where I grew up. And most people sort of just see that as like a forest and they know, trees and plants and mushrooms generally, but getting to know them individually and understanding, their uses and their their food sources and all those things sort of create this deeper connection that lets you experience nature and being in it in a whole different way.
Yeah, totally. I just got into like researching the Wood Wide Web. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just this like, I know there's some scientific articles on it and one researcher that's kind of been pushing the idea, but I've just been starting to kind of watch videos on it and then read into it. And it's so cool to kind of imagine the woods and the planet as like almost its own organism made up of many different
Yeah.
organisms, that are all working together. So there's all the stuff we do, like helping people or get educated about wild foods. Hopefully my goal is to build more resilient people, but then also help people really, just find that appreciation for nature and their food.
Yeah, that's my goal too, the deeper connection and appreciation and care about these resources and approaching them through food is such a easy way to get people interested in it. Um, I can spill all sorts of information about a spruce tree and people will listen, but when I tell them that there's things you can eat on it that taste good, then it's like this whole different, part of your brain starts becoming interested and active, and
Yeah.
it's a fun process to see.
Totally. It's that primal part of the brain.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, we talked earlier about foraging season coming to an end. I'm curious, like, do you have any, how was your mushroom year in general? Do you have any like exciting finds or stories you can share with us?
Yeah, it was a pretty quick mushroom year for me. I had a really busy summer and it wasn't the best. It was better than last year for sure. But the part of Colorado that I live in is the Northern Front Range, which is like the eastern quarter, the northeastern quarter of Colorado. And we had a really dry spring and early summer. So our Front Range mountains weren't getting a ton of rain. The western and southwestern part of Colorado got a lot more rain during the monsoon season. And so I spent a little bit of time over there and had kind of, a few trips that made up for the lack of stuff to see here. And I was doing, I did a lot of classes. I did 15 classes and a couple events this summer,
Nice. It's a lot.
late spring and summer. So yeah, I had a busy summer and I didn't have a ton of time to forage for myself, which is okay. I enjoy teaching as well. But yeah, the couple of mushroom classes that I did on my side of Colorado were, not as good as they could have been, but still stuff to see and plenty of plants to talk about.
Yeah. And did you find anything new this year that got you like really pumped up?
I did take a trip to Minnesota this summer. I always go to Minnesota to visit family in, July or August, and
Cool.
I
Where are
hang
they
out.
at? Where's your family at?
They're in the Twin Cities area.
Okay. So were
Yeah,
you, because I,
Minneapolis, St.
I went to,
Paul.
I went to school in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is really close
Oh yeah, yeah,
to that. I don't know if you went over there at all, but that whole driftless region, super
totally.
nice.
Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be in Prairie du Chien in 2 weeks or a week and a half.
Sweet. For the Wild Food Festival?
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
So I went to Minnesota in July, hung out with Tim, Minnesota forager, and he has this knack for finding bucket list mushrooms for me. So we don't have chicken of the woods really in Colorado. There's a
Yeah.
couple instances of it growing here, but he got me on my first chicken of the woods in Minnesota. I have since found it in Colorado, in one place where in a stump in town that I know it grows from. But then this summer he helped me find my first black trumpets, which also don't grow here.
Oh, nice. And that's one I've never found. I've been given it from friends have given it to me, but is are they in the Chanterelle like group?
Yeah, they're Craterella, so I think they're in the Chanterelle family.
Yeah. They're
Canthuraliaceae.
what did you eat them?
Yeah, yeah, I did. I took them home or took them to the lake house we were staying in and cooked them up. They were really good.
Yeah. What would you compare them to?
They were like the closest comparison is just another obscure mushroom, the blue chanterelle, which is not actually a chanterelle, but they just have like this sort of mild earthiness that's very pleasant, and then a little bit of mushroominess. Yeah, quite good. The other
Yeah.
the other exciting find was another blue chanterelle this summer. I paid it forward and helped a friend of mine here find his first blue chanterelles, which are in the Polyocellus genus, in the leathery earth fan family, Thelophoraceae. They just are called blue chanterelles because when they were first documented, they were like, "Hey, these look like chanterelles and they're blue, so we're going to call them chanterelles and put them there for now."
That's a common thing in the mushroom world, right?
It
Like,
is, yeah, it is.
is it why do you think that is? Is it just a lack of studying?
Yeah, it's such a novel field comparatively. Like we called mushrooms plants until 1970.
Yeah.
Um,
So
you
many
know,
people still do. They
yeah.
call
So
them
they were they
veggies.
they
Yeah.
were in the plant kingdom until 1969 or 1970, I think. So the initial studies were framing them as plants and what we knew about plant biology, and then we're like, these are totally different. We need to give these things their own kingdom and start studying them, as individual mushrooms or individual at least groups, and classifying them taxonomically. And so I think that that early so much of our early mushroom data comes from Europe, where they were doing it, longer and starting that process. And um, there's still so many taxonomic changes in the mushroom world that come in every year, like renaming and reclassifying, and as DNA sequencing, genetic sequencing gets less and less expensive, it becomes more accessible, and then more people are doing it, and then we learn more. So, that's the complicated answer to why things are named weirdly sometimes.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from Europe still. Um, the hedgehog mushroom I know is one where there's a lot of still uncertainty, and we've just been using the European names.
Yeah, and I recently saw that they maybe gave it a new genus. I think it's like Dentinum now instead of Hydnum.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Um, yeah, and there's something like I'm writing an article about, or updating in my article about hedgehogs right now, and I have a couple links on there. But I think it was 2017. There was a study that said there was like, you know dozens of species in North America that need to be studied further. I know in Colorado we have at least two.
Yeah. I found one out here. It's a really big hedgehog, though. I'm assuming it's probably the same that you have because I'm also in the Rocky Mountains. It's just when I lived in Wisconsin, they're all usually really small hedgehogs, but out here they're all like nice big white ones. Such good mushrooms.
Interesting. Yeah, we don't get the big ones here.
Oh,
The shift kind of happens in mid Wyoming, central Wyoming, kind of the Yellowstone ecosystem shifts from the southern Rocky Mountain species to the more like central and northern Rocky Mountain species. So, your Porcinis are different up there. I'm assuming do you have rainbow chanterelles?
yeah. So
Okay.
that's the one I mostly find. That's really the only one I found.
Yeah, that's the only one we have too. And that one's more widespreading. But we don't have that big hedgehog. We just have a couple little like orange ones. They don't get much bigger than a couple inches.
Yeah, man, I wish I had a picture here on me right now. I'll blend one in later on when I edit this so people can see what those look like that we have out here. If for anyone listening, if you haven't gone after hedgehogs, so tasty and just like a really easy beginner mushroom. I don't think
Mhm.
there's any look-alike to be concerned about at all,
No, no,
really.
they're actually my favorite. If I had to pick one, my favorite mushroom to eat. And there are no toxic toothed mushrooms, so super safe. Nothing really looks like a hedgehog, anyways. But the whole toothed group is very safe.
Yeah. So, talking about potentially poisonous or toxic mushrooms, and kind of we were chatting about there being so many mushrooms all around the world and many that haven't even been studied deeply. I'm curious, have you ever gotten into a situation where you ate the wrong mushroom and experienced some sort of side effects?
I haven't, no. In almost 25 years of mushroom hunting, and foraging, I've never made a mistake by misidentification. I stick hard and fast to the 100% confidence rule, with the addendum of also having 100% comfort. So, that's never eat any wild food until you're 100% confident in it, in your identification of it. And then I add on the comfortable with it as well, because I lean more towards the cautious side when it comes to trying new wild foods. So there might be species that I can easily, readily identify, after a short time of studying it, but it's maybe a little bit more obscure, or I heard of someone getting sick from eating it, and I just want to do a little more research and, become more comfortable with it before I take that plunge. So, um, following those rules, I've never been sickened by a misidentification. I have been sick once, potentially from eating wild mushroom, and it was hawk's wings, Sarcodon imbricatus, which I've eaten my entire life. But a couple years ago, I had some with dinner, and I had a beer, and I was sick the next morning, and it was just like general food poisoning. So it could have been food poisoning, although that would also have been the first time I had food poisoning. um, the day before, somebody had told me that their partner couldn't eat hawk's wings and have alcohol. And there is, just a general interaction of alcohol with our bodies that can create allergic reactions or exacerbate them. So it may have just been that I never had alcohol with hawk's wings, or I had developed a new sort of sensitivity. I haven't eaten them since, but I might give it another go this year to see if have the same reaction or don't eat
Yeah.
them anymore or something.
Yeah, that is something that happens. I've heard it with alcohol and morels
Mhm.
that people have had that issue. And then recently, one of my followers, an ex, had hit me up about oyster mushrooms, and she was saying she's always been able to eat them, and all of a sudden she just felt horrible for like 2 days, and the same batch that they had already eaten from, and it
Yeah.
was all like super weird, just like out of nowhere. And sadly,
Yeah,
that can happen.
it can. The other considerations that are less likely or, but still possible are contaminants from the environment, if they were in a drainage that, picked up some sort of heavy metal or toxin that, the mushrooms absorbed or, potentially waste or bacteria, if they weren't cooked thoroughly enough and had something on them, but more
Yeah,
likely the alcohol interaction was what caused it.
yeah, that's a big point for anyone listening who is new to all this. Like, just cook your mushrooms well. Don't eat them raw, especially if they're coming from the wild. I always cook my mushrooms pretty well, and I like them crispy.
Yeah, that's just a good guideline for mushrooms in general. They're mostly chitin, which is hard for us to digest. So cooking them helps break that down for our bodies. And then you reduce the risk of any sort of bacterial or viral sort of interactions if animals bit on them. They are wild creatures after all. There are a few mushrooms I'll eat raw. I'll eat raw in very small quantities. If I find a very nice, clean, fresh one, but it's a rarity for sure. Mostly, I cook them really well.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. That's a good rule of thumb there. And I think going back to side effects from eating the wrong mushroom, I think there's only like 1% of wild mushrooms that are deadly poisonous. So that should be at least a little bit of a comfort for people who are just getting into it. But still, like going back to what you said, always make sure 100% that you're like, before you eat anything, that you're totally right on with the ID and whatnot. What's like, I mean, you talked about it a little bit, the concept of being 100% sure and then being comfortable with it. But what's kind of have you developed a process for yourself to identifying a new mushroom that you kind of go through?
Yeah, I have, and you know, it's it's sort of it's maybe challenging to describe because I'm using 25 years of like brain data essentially.
Yeah.
But it's all kind of rooted in pattern recognition, which is a topic I really like talking about when it comes to foraging. Pattern recognition is just, our brain's natural process of receiving information and then trying to figure out how to react to it. And so we're using it, every day, many, many times a day to make decisions of when we're driving or meeting people. Our brains are looking for patterns that they recognize. And so I internalize those patterns purposefully. I take my time to observe mushrooms. I look at closely at their textures, how they're growing, sort of small little things that I just sort of let my brain absorb. And then that builds this like database that I can then reference when I'm identifying new mushrooms. So obviously that's something that's hard to do for newer foragers, and takes time. And so when I'm identifying mushrooms, I'm referencing that information. I'm like, this, fits with this pattern that I already know. I'll usually smell the mushrooms immediately when I pick them. I handle them, look for small features that might be missed from a faraway observation, and I compare all of that data, you know, into whatever my mind has, and then place it generally. So oftentimes, if it's, a not super familiar mushroom, I can get it to maybe a family or even maybe an order. And then if I want to dig further, I'll hit the books or research online or put it in one of the groups. But usually when it comes to, mycological study, I'm good with just like the family or genus. I'm not super interested in getting all the way to the species level if I'm not going to eat it. And even then, sometimes I'm okay with just genus, depending on the group of mushrooms it is. For newer foragers, mushrooms in particular can be challenging because they, we have the newer AI things to sort of lean on in recent years, where we can snap a picture of a plant, hit Google Lens or iPhone plant identifier, or hop on one of the many apps and get a head start on identifying it. Mushrooms tend to still give those apps a little bit of challenge. So my approach, if I was starting from zero, would be to take lots of good pictures, both before and after picking. Note any no interesting smells or staining, interesting textures that might stand out, and then I bring all of that information and research in books. I have lots of those behind me. These are all mushroom books over here, some down there, and I also get online and put them in groups and let the more mycologically minded help me out as well.
Yeah, I'm sure you also have some mentors you're gonna go to.
Yeah, I've got a lot of friends that are better at mushroom identification for mycological reasons. I know our edible ones really well, but some of those more obscure little species, I don't bother absorbing all the information about them because I only have so much room in my brain.
Yeah, totally. That's why, like, I think mentors are huge, or just finding your like foraging group, of
Hmm.
people, because then you can like live multiple lifetimes through everyone, like teach
Totally.
each other. I love that.
Yeah, there's
It's
always more
just
to learn.
totally, yeah, super powerful stuff. Um, yeah, I think those are some really good tips for beginners to get started. Do you have like an extensive note taking system you kind of use for your mushrooms, like a journal or something?
I use Notion as my like everything app. I organize all my content, all of my tasks, projects, literally everything is in Notion. So um, I sort of have over the last couple of years have built this like product that I call a foraging calendar that I actually offer as a paid service to some people that are interested in it. But it's sort of where I like hold all of my information that I'm learning and gaining for these plants and mushrooms, and I'll add in, like recipe references I want to try and other reference links and like my notes and pictures about them, and sort of form it in a very like educational, almost like a digital field guide. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of my process for that.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. I've started something like that as well, just for me, for my own notes. And there's, like you said, so much to learn. So, and you can only hold so much in your brain.
Hmm.
So it's good to have something to get back to, and like such a cool thing to have, 5 years down the road if you're just starting one. Just this like second brain for yourself, like your second foraging brain almost.
Totally.
Love it. So, I'm also all about helping people find wild foods that can be like an actual sustainable food source, like provide a decent amount of food year after year.
Hmm.
Because a big mission for us is like help people become more resilient through their food. So I'm curious, what edible mushrooms would you kind of go after to get the best bang for your buck if we're like talking quantity?
For sure. Yeah. So, the two that come to mind initially, for Colorado at least, would be oysters and porcini.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, hawkswings could get a special note. Oysters are kind of our spring, like our biggest spring mushroom in Colorado. We also have morels and many other good edible spring mushrooms, but oysters are kind of the most prevalent. They grow mostly along our river habitats in the lower elevations, and from cottonwood and occasionally willows and a few other species. But we have a lot of cottonwood here, and so if you can find a recently dead log, they will often reliably fruit oysters for 5 or 7 years. And so you can go back year after year and get, pounds of oyster mushrooms off, the same log. I think that's a very sustainable source of fungal food for the spring, at least. Some of the other fun spring mushrooms that I mentioned, like morels, are maybe more exciting to find, but they require a lot more effort.
Mm-hmm.
And then for summer, the porcinis are probably the best bang for your buck. They are more reliant on our rainy season. So if we don't get a summer monsoon season, if we had a bad snow year, the porcini and all mushrooms can just, not fruit. Last year we had a year like that where we had, very, very little fungal growth.
Same here.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that's pretty similar for most of the Rocky Mountains, maybe until you get up to like coastal BC. But yeah, the porcinis here, they can fruit in large numbers. I've picked 30 pounds in an afternoon of just prime porcini buttons, easily. They get huge. You can often find, 20 or 24-inch at their largest, and sometimes you can find them in good enough condition to bring home and dehydrate. I generally don't eat the giant ones because they're kind of soft and often a little buggy. But if they're in good shape, I'll dry them. And then hawkswings are also a really reliable, common summer mushroom for us here. They fruit in large numbers. They usually fruit near water, so they're a little less reliant on the rains. And they are a tasty edible for most people, barring you don't have a reaction like I did to them. And a small percentage of people, maybe 10 to 15%, have, I think it's a genetic reaction or a genetic response, and they find them to be inedibly bitter or metallic tasting.
Interesting.
So, yeah, there's a number of people that just can't eat them because of that. They're not toxic, but they just taste bad.
Yeah, I haven't heard about that yet. That's good to know. I also haven't eaten hawkswing yet. We find a good amount of porcini here, and oysters are such. Yeah, I totally agree. That's such a great food source, and I think it's also good to note that oysters can kind of be found all over the U.S. We have a whole podcast episode on oysters from like a few weeks ago. If someone listening wants to check that out, a deep dive there. Yes, all three great mushroom species. And I want to get into a deep dive in porcini in a bit here. I think first though, we got a bunch of community questions that, I posted on social media about having you on, and thanks for reposting that too, because I got some of questions from your followers too there.
Oh,
so
cool.
I picked some of the better ones that I thought would be valuable for the conversation here. So maybe we can just rapid fire through some of them.
Yeah, let's do it.
The first one is from Not the Real Rick Ross. And he asks, what are the most underrated, seldom talked about late summer or fall species to go after for mushrooms?
I'm going to keep this to Colorado specifically because that's what I know the best.
Totally
there were a bunch of fall species that grow elsewhere that came to mind, but they're talked about a lot. So for Colorado, the late summer fall species that I'm going after, usually Matsutake, those are pretty talked about. So I would say they're not underrated. Honey mushrooms are another big one. Those are really popular in other states. I think they get less attention in Colorado. We have a honey mushroom species here, Armillaria ostoye, which is the same species as the, like one of the arguably largest organisms in the world. I think it's Oregon, where that big honey mushroom colony is.
Isn't it like 200 football fields or something?
Yeah, it's just like a giant colony of honey mushroom mycelium. Honey mushrooms are parasitic, so they attack living trees and steal their energy, steal their nutrients, and eventually kill them. but they can fruit in large numbers in our forests in Colorado, and they're pretty tasty. They do need to be cooked well, especially well. They can cause some GI upset if not cooked well. There's one that I have not found, but it's been on my list as a fall mushroom. The sand mushroom. I think it's
Ooh,
Trichiloma populinum or Trichiloma populifila. Let's look it up real quick.
yeah.
Populinum. Yeah, populinum was right. So Trichiloma populinum is a cottonwood associated trichiloma. And, trichiloma is the same genus as Matsutake. There's some other edible species in that genus. It's quite large and very diverse. But these ones tend to grow in the lower elevations when the temperatures have cooled down, which is generally fall here. And so you can find them apparently growing along our rivers, sort of, in eastern Colorado and into the plains. And so that's been one on my list that I'd like to find and try. Definitely a seldom talked about one, I think.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. Sand
Yeah,
mushroom.
yeah. I'm starting to get into some of these like more obscure species a little bit, but those are the ones that come to mind. I know there are others that I just can't think of, but our mushroom season falls off really quick. So like September, late September, we usually get our first frost. Sometimes even as soon as mid September, and once we start freezing, the mushrooms are just for the most part done. Occasionally, we can get a late fruiting of chanterelles that will last a little longer, and then things like matsutakes can go a little longer because they're protected a little bit more by the dust that they're growing under. But our mountain mushrooms fall off really quick.
The
And
the the hedgehog for us is one that I've been finding into October, which is for me, I feel like that's pretty late.
yeah, the very first time I found hedgehog mushrooms, and it's still one of my best patches. They're pretty rare in Colorado, so I have I think 6 or 7 patches that I revisit, year after year, but every once in a while, I'll find a new patch, and I'll pin it and add it to my list because, they do tend to fruit, year after year in the good conditions, but I was grouse hunting with a friend in late September, early October, and we came across this patch of, mushrooms, and they were all frozen solid.
Oh.
But he pointed them out, and we picked one, and I identified it, and then I brought them all home and cooked them up frozen, and they were really good. So that was, yeah, you can still find some late season mushrooms in Colorado, but once we
Yeah.
start freezing, it's game over often. And so then you can kind of shift more into the lower elevations where things haven't frozen yet, and start looking for, like I mentioned, the sand mushroom. We have 2 species of wild enoki here, Flammulina. The Flammulina volutipes grows in the low elevations as well as the temperatures come down. That's what a really great edible mushroom. It is one that I would say requires, a little more caution. Um, it's in the little brown mushroom category, so the cautionary reasoning there is that deadly Galerina is very common in Colorado, and that's one of our deadly mushroom species. So you just want to make sure that you know how to differentiate deadly Galerina from honey mushrooms or wild enoki before consuming them. But those wild enoki, if you find a nice patch of them, are a really, really great edible mushroom.
They
You
they
know,
kind of grow inside the tree usually too, right? Like on the
yeah, or
bark.
like, coming up out of the bark or in small clusters at the base of stumps and logs. They're really cool. We also get them on our aspens in the mountains, and that's
Mm,
Flammulina populicola, different species.
that's a
But
good
they're
tip. I'll have to see if I have those out here because there's, as you know, the Rocky Mountains are lacking in deciduous trees. So
totally, yeah. Those are a really fun one to find. Just, it's I don't do it that as often as I should, but hunting in aspen stands, mushroom hunting in aspen stands is a lot of fun because there are species that will just grow with them, like those wild enokis, the aspen oyster mushrooms will only grow with aspens, and a handful of others that are pretty cool. Um, our hericium are one that's one that's top of my bucket list. I've never found it in Colorado or anywhere for that matter, but the one that does grow here, Hericium coralloides, is another aspen and cottonwood associate.
That's a type
So
of like lion's mane,
yeah,
right?
lion's
Yeah.
mane. Yep. So
Yeah.
I was actually leading a group this summer, and someone in my group found a really tiny one growing on an aspen log. So that
Oh,
was really cool to see.
yeah, that's cool. You're probably like, shoot, someone else
Yeah.
found it.
Yeah, it wasn't in like an edible state. It was kind of on its way out, pretty
Okay.
small, but I got an idea at least of where to look and how to find them now. So I'll try again next summer.
I'll have to see if they're around here too. I'm sure they are.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of a rare one. People find them every year, but they grow in habitats that I just don't spend that much time in. So
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think we answered that question pretty good.
there are a lot more we could keep going, I'm sure.
Yeah. Another one is from Andrew Early, and this one is definitely more of a beginner-oriented question, but he asks, other than morels, what are the easiest mushrooms to identify for beginners? And we talked about some of them already, like the hedgehog, but maybe you got 2, 3 other ones
Totally.
that he
Yeah.
can start looking at.
I'm glad that Andrew's lumped morels into good beginner mushrooms because I agree with that. I think a lot of people think morels are a little bit more challenging because of these like scary false morels, but they're so different. It's very very easy to identify a morel positively, just by looking at its cap shape and cutting it in half vertically, completely hollow inside versus the chambered kind of more amorphous growth of the false morels. So porcinis, I think, are a really, really great mushroom for beginners. They have a couple of qualities that are sort of consistent, and we'll talk more about this in the porcini deep dive. But they, for the most part, don't stain when you cut them. Then they all have a structure called reticulation on their stem, which is a netting pattern that's sort of very pretty on some of them that are especially strongly reticulated. But if you can check off those couple qualities and it has stem reticulation, it's a king bolete or a porcini. And we have around 15 porcinis in North America, different species. So
That's good
really
to know,
great
I
one.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk more about those in the deep dive.
Yeah.
Chanterelles are a great beginner species as well. There are a few, lookalikes that are more concerning in other parts of North America, namely the jack-o'-lantern mushroom. But if you can conceptualize the difference between a false gill or a ridge, which is what a chanterelle has, and a real gill, which is what some other lookalike mushrooms have, it becomes quite simple to differentiate them. I always like to explain it as like if you imagine a cloth on a flat surface and you go to the cloth and you just pinch up the cloth and make little folds in it. That's what a chanterelle has. Its flesh is actually pinched and folded into these ridges or false gills, versus true gills or real gills would be like laying another cloth perpendicularly, upright,
Yeah.
or a piece of paper. So it's a separate structure that can be separated for the
Yeah.
most part.
You actually have some pictures here. Let me just share those quick while we're talking about them. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure we
let's
had some,
look at those.
because that's a big one, I think, for the chanterelles. Something I've been curious about too. So I have yet to. I think I might have just found my first false chanterelle. Let's see. I think right in here. So can you see that? Just
Yep.
screen share. So you got that's the real chanterelle that you were talking about, the rainbow one.
Yep. So you can see those forking false gills or forking ridges. They're
Yeah,
decurrent.
definitely.
They run down the stem.
I think that what you were saying about grabbing like a cloth, that's a really good example. Like that's that kind of fold.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then here, so one sec, here we got another picture of the rainbow chanterelles. So for anyone listening right now, we're going to show some pictures, I think, for the rest of the podcast too. So if you want to watch this on YouTube, definitely hop over there because that'll be helpful. And then this one is the false chanterelle, right?
Yep, that's right. So this is Hygrophorapsis aurantiaca. the false chanterelle or mock chanterelle, and these are actually not toxic. I've heard that they're a pretty good edible mushroom as well. I've never tried them myself, but they're just not a chanterelle. This is our main one in Colorado that would be like potentially confused for a chanterelle, and you can see the obvious differences. There are some forks in those gills, but they're actually a separable gill layer versus that sort of pinched flesh of the chanterelle. Chanterelles also have white flesh inside. You can see these are more of like an orangish cream color. And then chanterelles peel like string cheese, which is a very unique quality to them. If you kind of pinch their stem and peel them apart, they sort of have that like string cheese like quality. And they smell fruity. So
Yeah.
all of those put together makes for chanterelle positive identification.
How often do you find these false ones where you are?
Not very often.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I saw it here. I'll show you quick what I found the other day. I don't know. This looks different to me. Do you know what this is?
That looks like a delicious milk cap or a saffron milk cap, Lactarius deliciosus, or Lactarius deliciosus group. That's a European species, of course. But yeah, I'm almost positive that's a milk cap. See that kind of bluish green on the stem?
Yep.
So those bleed orange when you damage them, and then they turn this like bluish green color. And those are edible. They're another pretty tasty edible mushroom.
Cool. Well, that's another seldom talked about, I feel like, fall mushroom then maybe.
Yeah,
I just found it last week.
They're pretty common. They're pretty commonly talked about in Colorado. And then in Europe, they're very popular, especially in Eastern Europe. These ones, the Lactarius deliciosus group, in Russia and other parts of Eastern Europe, they pickle or salt ferment them. So they'll layer them in a container and then do like a herbal salt, like a pretty dense layer, and then just keep that layering going, and then they'll press them, and the salt pulls out the moisture, and it sort of totally changes their texture and makes them almost like a mushroom cheese. And if my understanding is correct, they serve them. They'll put them in a little container of fresh water to leach out some of the salt, and then they'll eat them with vodka, of course.
Oh my God.
And I've done it, and they're really, really good.
I'm going to have to try that now. That's a hot tip right there.
Yeah. If you pick a nice cluster of them, definitely give the salt fermentation a try. You can find directions online.
Yeah, I will have to do that. Cool. For the false chanterelle, I guess one more thing, you mentioned the true gills. For me, it's always like those gills I can kind of brush through them like pages in a book. That's kind of how I like to always describe it.
Yeah, that's a good reference too, for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Let me just stop the share here quick. Yeah, so Porcini, the chanterelles, and what was the other one you mentioned for beginner mushrooms?
Chanterelles, we talked about morels. I think hawkswings are another great one if you're in Colorado. That mushroom, that genus of mushroom, Sarcodon, grows all over North America, but the ones in the Southern Rockies, for whatever reason, are the best to eat. I think it's just we need some more DNA work on those to figure out exactly which species are where. We found some hawkswings in Minnesota that, I would have called Sarcodon imbricatus. They were a little bit different than the ones we have in Colorado, but close enough that that's what they would be identified as. And they were super bitter. So yeah, definitely something going on there. But if you're in Colorado, that's a great one. Toothed mushrooms, like I said, are super safe, no toxic toothed mushrooms. And then, I think oysters are also pretty safe, especially in Colorado. We don't have any lookalikes for oysters here.
Yeah, I think there's the angel wing out east and Midwest kind of, but there's mixed info on if they're actually bad for you or not. Yeah, I'm not sure that I have an opinion on that one, but I have read the debate for sure. Yeah, cool. Well, Andrew, hopefully we answered that question and you got some new mushrooms to learn. Yeah. Next one is from Eric Altmaier, and he asks, when is the optimal time to go out foraging for mushrooms? Like, should people be looking out for some sort of, humidity levels, a certain amount of days after a rainfall, a certain temperature drop or spike? what do you usually look for? Like when do you know it's a hot day?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, this is particularly important in Colorado and the Rockies where things are drier and more reliant on rainfall. Certainly, a dry year in the Midwest or East Coast would also determine, when to go out based on rain. But those regions tend to have more consistent humidity and more consistent rainfall, and so and higher water tables. So they sort of have more consistent mushroom seasons, and then their I guess their floor is higher and their ceiling is lower than ours are. We have much larger spikes and variation in those conditions. So for Colorado, I don't pay attention to humidity. We're pretty dry for the most part. If it's a good season, or at least a decent season, I will try to go out after a rainfall, maybe 4 to 5 days. That tends to be kind of the sweet spot for me. During a really, really dry, bad mushroom season, even if we get a rainfall, unless it's, something really special, those mushrooms will often just take the year off. If it's been like drought, a random rainfall drought, they won't fruit in that for the most part. I'll still go look if I'm in the area. I'm always looking for mushrooms when I'm out in the mountains, but there's some sort of, a little bit of like control the expectations. Not all rainfall is made equal in Colorado for sure. It's more, I think, important to understand the seasons that you're after. So our spring season here is sort of, after last frost, which was like late April, mid-April, to June. And then during that time, I'm sort of shifting up in elevation, moving from the low kind of urban elevations up into the middle and high elevations in the mountains. And then July, August are sort of our peak summer season, and then late August, September are fall season. And then late September, I'll shift down into the lower elevation to, find those last minute species that might be fruiting. I think that's kind of a better way to look at it, and then judge it. Also based on social media. If you're on social media at all, look at what people in your region are posting, and if they're
Yeah.
having good luck, and you can find out generally where they are, there's an indication that you should be out there looking too. And then the final tool I'll mention that I use a lot is a rain estimator. I use the NOAA, NOAA, and yeah, weather website. It's like a rain predictor website. It's water.noaa.gov, and it has a precipitation estimate that you can dial in by different day ranges, and you can zoom in on the map and see like estimated rainfall in certain areas. And so I will use that to sort of pinpoint where I might want to go foraging.
Oh, that's a great tip.
If I'm looking for lobster mushrooms here in Colorado, they only grow in ponderosa pine. So I have several ponderosa forests that I know will fruit lobster mushrooms, and so I'll see if any of those have gotten good rain in the last, I'll check 30 days, and then I'll dial down 2 weeks, 10 days, 5 days, and I'll look for that sort of rain variance. If it all fell a month ago, and over the last 2 weeks it's been dry, then I won't go to that spot. But if it's like it got a couple inches 30 days ago, it got an inch 14 days ago, and it got another inch 7 days ago, then it's like consistent rain over a month. It's a spot I'll go check out.
That is super valuable. You're the first person to ever tell me about that.
Yeah,
So
it's a really
people
good
listening,
tool.
people listening, definitely take some notes. That's huge. That can potentially save you a lot of time. It's
Mhm.
like e-scouting for mushrooms. I love it.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, I do that, and I use Onyx as well for all of my mapping needs, and I do a lot of digital scouting for mushrooms on there as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like more elevation, or how do you use it?
Elevation, I'll look for, if it's a drier year like this, I'll look for areas where there might be, water or moisture capturing features. Like if I know, or if I see on the map that a mountain range has snow on it, or maybe would be a place where runoff would collect in maybe a mountain meadow, or I see, streams and those sorts of features, I can sort of pinpoint, where I might want to target based on that extra moisture. And then tree species you can sometimes, pick apart. at the very least, you can pick apart aspen and conifer, and then sometimes you can see the difference between lodgepole and spruce and fir. And some, I don't know if Onyx has it, but some of these maps even have like forest types now in them.
Yeah, Onyx does have that. That's I haven't used that yet, but that's a really good point. I should start doing that. And then also, what I usually do is just like look at the hillsides, like orientation. Is it north? Is it south? You know, that can
Totally.
impact where mushrooms will be during different times of the season. What
Yep.
would you say usually more in the spring, like northern or southern hillside? How do you usually look at it?
If I was going to pick one place, one type of habitat to target in the summer, I would be looking for a northern facing aspect at 9,000 feet or above 9,000 feet, ideally in a spruce forest. That's like prime summer mushroom habitat in Colorado. In the spring, it's less important because a lot of the spring mushrooms are growing along the rivers, so you can sort of just pick out the river habitats and go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the non-burn black morels and even burn morels, some of that's a little more important, finding water and aspects. But yeah, summer for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't really done it too much in the spring. That's I usually just do oysters and morels during that time out here, and that's plenty of mushroom foraging. That's another thing I guess we can quickly touch on is just find kind of your species that you really like to go after because it can pretty quickly become overwhelming.
It can, yeah.
Yeah,
Spring is like I'm like a maniac. Like there's plants and mushrooms and some hunting and fishing to do, and it's just like what do I target? And I always am interested in adding new things. So sometimes I need to dial it back and hit my reliable spots first. So
totally.
it's fun though.
Yeah. So another community question we had that I think we answered is from Mars Lamute, and it was basically like, how does elevation affect the types of mushrooms you find, or the time you
We
should be
did,
looking?
yeah.
So we touched on that one.
Yep. Temperature elevation affects temperature, tree species, habitat types, and those are all super important.
Yeah. And then we talked about the chanterelles. That was another community question by Christina, the true chanterelles versus false chanterelles. And talking about chanterelles, my girlfriend made me this chanterelle drinking mug here.
That's cool.
I figured this would be the right podcast to show it off.
That's super cool.
Yeah, she just got it to me as a gift. So shout out to Lindy
Yeah.
when she's listening this. Yeah, so great. Those were some of the more interesting, I thought, community questions. There was one, it's pretty obscure, but Yanara asked if it's true that you should not cook wild mushrooms like shaggy manes in cast iron. Have you heard of that?
I haven't, no. I think, in fact, I would encourage cooking wild mushrooms in cast iron because you can get a nice sear and better temperature control.
Yeah.
I cook mine in cast iron often, including shaggy manes. But no, I haven't heard that. I'd be curious to know where that stems
Came
from.
from. Yeah, same here. So, yeah, I do it all the time too. Never had any issues. Cool. All right. Well, we talked about a porcini deep dive, which I think we definitely should do because it's such a powerful mushroom to learn. Like
Yeah,
you said earlier, it's like one that can be super abundant. You mentioned 30 pounds in one day. Holy crap. I've never had a day like that. That's pretty insane.
Yeah, we had a couple amazing years in a row, 2019, 2020, both really good summer mushroom seasons.
Yeah, it's like berries. There's boom and bust years.
Mm-hmm.
So distribution wise, I think that's always a good place to start for people listening to kind of, know if they even grow in their area. Where do the porcini usually grow around the US?
I think they grow in pretty much every state. Maybe Florida doesn't have any. Oftentimes Florida's like the outlier because of their tropical ecosystems down there. They're just like, they get weird different stuff that we just don't have anywhere else. And they don't get some of the stuff we have. But I think pretty much the rest of the US and potentially even Florida has a porcini species. Like I said, there are 15 Porcini species in North America. These would be classified as Boletus edulis-like mushrooms. So Boletus edulis is the type species of Porcini from Europe. And it sort of is the one that kind of created, we called all of our Porcini Boletus edulis until, the last decade or so in Colorado. Our Porcini Boletus rubriceps was named in 2014 and separated from Boletus edulis. So still lots to learn about the Porcinis. We have another one in Colorado as well, the white king bolete, which is Boletus barrousii. But yeah, 15 total or so in North America and spread throughout, coast to coast pretty much. So yeah, if
Making
you're,
it
it's a great mushroom.
Yeah, making it a great mushroom. Exactly. That's what I was about to say to go after. And the 15 different species, are they all they all look pretty similar?
Yeah, they're pretty similar. There's some variation in cap color. Some might be, more of a tan or a lighter color. Ours in the Southern Rockies are like a very deep rusty red. At least the Boletus rubriceps. The other one is white, entirely white. But they all tend to have pores that, start off as an off-white and mature to an olive or yellow color. They have pretty robust stems and that stem reticulation, that netting pattern that we talked about. And I have a really good picture of stem reticulation.
Yeah, let me pull them up quick. Let me pull up those pictures quick because that'll help for sure. So these are the nice red-capped ones you were talking about.
Yep. So these are Boletus rubriceps, the Rocky Mountain king bolete. These are found in the southern Rocky Mountains, kind of southern Wyoming, down the Four Corners area.
Here's another picture. Fat stems. That's a big ID factor.
Really chunky stems. The ones here, this species associates with spruce and fir and occasionally pine, but their favorite is spruce. The white king bolete that we also have associates with pines, mostly ponderous pine.
Do you have a picture of that one by any chance?
I didn't include a picture of that one.
Yeah, maybe. I'll have to add. I don't know do you know what we have in Montana by any chance? I don't know.
I think in Montana you have the Boletus edulis or Boletus CF edulis. Like it's essentially an equivalent that hasn't been named yet.
Yeah, because it's usually like a tan cap, like really tan yellow to white, I would say.
Do you get spring king boletes?
I have never looked for them in the spring, so no, you got me onto something.
That might just be a West Coast thing. I don't know. We don't have them here either. I was just curious if Montana got them. So this is the stem reticulation. Super deep netting pattern on this one. Sometimes it's a little more subtle, but you can very clearly see that pattern on this one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big ID factor for them. So the big fat stem, especially the fat stem when they're younger, I would say. Mm-hmm. The reticulation and then the pores, which this is a great picture also for that. They are a porous mushroom.
Separable tube layer. Instead of, like a polypore, which is just like someone poked holes in the bottom of a mushroom, these have a sponge laying on top of or on the underside of their cap. So you can peel that sponge off. It's also edible. Some people like to separate it and use it separately from the mushroom itself.
Yeah. And then that also has a spore print that kind of goes with it, right? What does that usually look like?
Yeah, the spores are olive. At least for this species, they are. I think they're olive for most of the Porcinis in North America.
Yeah, that's what I've seen too. And usually, like you mentioned, pores when they're younger are more white. As the mushroom gets older, more olive color to yellow almost.
Yep.
And any other big ID factors, smell-wise, maybe?
Smell, they're just very mild, kind of earthy. These ones in Colorado, the Boletus rubriceps, have a very greasy cap. It's like it's got this kind of greasy feel and look. You can kind of see that, and it's like almost waxy looking.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good feature for ours here in Colorado. Yeah, and then they don't stain. Their flesh, when you cut them, does not stain. It can sometimes discolor. It can be like a little like yellow especially if there's insect damage. And then sometimes if you cut them from cap down, you can pull in some of that like pink from the cap, but they don't actively stain a different color.
that's really important to point out, because that's what you do here. If we pivot into lookalikes a bit, I think one of the only Porcini lookalike that is actually an issue. You can probably speak more on it, but that one stains blue, right?
Yeah, so there are a few boletes that around North America that you don't want to eat. Some toxic boletes that can cause issues. In Colorado, the main one would be the aspen scaber stock. Um, it's a it's in the genus Lexinum,
I think you had a
and
picture of that, right?
yeah, I do. Yeah,
This one.
the scaber stock there. So the main differentiator is, their stalk, instead of having reticulation, has scabers, which are a dark brown or black fuzzy texture on them. And then the flesh of these, when you cut it, stains some variation of gray, blue, purple, in that range. Some of them can stain red as well, but more often they're gray or blue or purple.
And you said that one is not a good lookalike,
So
not edible.
they are a lookalike, and I recommend not eating them in Colorado specifically, but in other places too. But that comes with the caveat that Lexinum as a genus is eaten all around the world by millions of people that don't have issues with them. Specifically in Colorado, we have one that associates with aspen trees that has an orange cap. This one in this picture is one of our conifer associates. The aspen is like a very obvious orange cap. And this one is responsible for the most calls to poison control in Colorado. Um, and we don't fully know why, but we believe it's from undercooking. There's some compound or something that causes severe GI upset when they're undercooked. And
Interesting.
there's also some instances of that happening with orange capped scaber stocks in other countries and other states too. So my recommendation if people were going to eat these would be to cook them very well. I would recommend boiling for 15 to 20 minutes prior to any other cooking. And this picture that we're looking at now is a button scaber stock on the left and a button porcini on the right. So
it somewhat looks similar, but definitely you can tell the differences, especially with that reticulation.
When they're young like this, the stems are often kind of buried, but the cap differences become very obvious, that like greasy of the porcini versus the like velvety or fuzzy of the scaber stock. But once you pick them, it's very obvious from the stem and the flesh staining, which develops after 5 to 10 minutes.
Great. That's good to know. Yeah, because I found a lot of these and I've never eaten them.
Yeah, I haven't either.
So let me see. And then you have another one in here, more
So
yellow looking bolete.
the other bolete that we commonly have in Colorado are slippery jacks in the Suillus genus. And these are edible. They're not, I wouldn't call them choice edibles, but we have quite a number of different species. They're much smaller than porcinis. Some of them stain, some of them don't. Some of them have rings or veil remnants, like you can see on this one. This is the Western painted Suillus, Suillus lakei, and it associates with Douglas fir here in Colorado. But these are all edible, the Suillus species. They just need to be peeled. So the cap has this like separable skin cuticle, is what it's called, a skin layer that you can peel off. And then they can be cooked up. They're kind of slimy, so I tend to just dehydrate these, but they are edible.
You just dehydrate them and then not rehydrate them, or how do you
dehydrate them and use them in, as a mushroom powder, or rehydrate them and cook them? It kind of removes some of that sliminess when you dry them.
That's a good tip. Cool. Yeah, because I see a lot of yellow boletes that I haven't messed with yet either.
Yeah, you probably have quite a few Suillus up there too.
Yeah. One time I found the world of boletes is so interesting to me, and I still have a lot to learn, but I just was in my porcini woods and I found this group of older Ukrainian women that were just picking all sorts of boletes. And I'm like, wow, I got to learn a lot more about these, because they had pretty full baskets and I just had a few porcini.
So, the Eastern European tend to, when it's like mushroom hunting is their culture, so they they're raised doing that. They're a lot more comfortable eating more obscure species that we're less comfortable with. They're sort of more comfortable with like big, just like similar groups. Like they'll eat a lot of the russulas, the brittlegills that, I wouldn't eat, and a lot of the boletes that I would maybe be a little more cautious about and
Yeah.
try individually. The other thing is they tend to, this is a little bit of a generalization, but they tend to boil all their mushrooms first. So that boiling can kind of help remove some of those like potentially minor irritants.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of cool how boiling works like that for plants too. All right.
Yeah.
It's like that's a whole nother level of foraging is like the processing.
Yeah, it is.
You can make things edible by processing them in certain ways.
Totally.
Sweet. So for porcini, do you think we covered the ID factors and lookalikes pretty well?
I think so.
So I guess we can go into when they would usually fruit. I think we kind of touched on it here and there.
Yeah, in Colorado, it's pretty much July and August. I occasionally will find some in late June, low elevation spots, maybe around 8,000 feet. They'll fruit as low as the spruce and fir will grow. And spruce kind of tend to be like about 8,000 is their minimum or their maximum low elevation, I guess.
Yeah. So
it's a weird way to say that, but
they love spruce trees. Is kind of what I'm hearing.
They will also grow with fir trees and pine trees, but they just tend to love those spruce trees. Like all of the best flushes of porcini I found are with spruce.
Yeah, so definitely a good thing to learn how to identify if you don't know already. The spruce, they're also a great winter forage or plant to forage for in winter in general. I think
spruce trees are wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. During dry conditions, are there any strategies that us foragers can use to kind of increase chances of finding porcini, or is it just a lost cause?
Yeah, we touched on some of these briefly, doing some digital scouting with that rain gauge tool I mentioned, looking for areas with natural water features or natural moisture, like mountain lakes, mountain streams, areas that would collect snow melt in the spring that might settle. All of those can sort of bump up your chances of finding little microclimates and microhabitats where some mushrooms might be fruiting. And then, of course, looking for the right trees. And then, if it's a dry year, trying to target areas that have been getting rain too.
Right. Yeah, I think those tips you gave earlier, honestly, gold. Like, it's rarely talked about stuff. So great stuff. I think, because I read your article on porcini, I think you mentioned in there that you don't usually target streams. Is that true? Maybe
I tend not to, because they're often in like darker forests, where porcinis don't grow as commonly. They tend to grow more on the edges where there's a little more sunlight, maybe the mountain, a mountain meadow edge or a forest clearing, areas where they're getting a little bit of exposure. And the streams, and rivers, I just don't have as much luck in Colorado, at least in my part of Colorado, where those are, also coinciding with those exposures.
Right. Yeah, because people, it's commonly said, go look around streams because there's water for mushrooms in general. So I thought that was really interesting to hear.
Yeah, and I've had some luck around streams, depending on the habitat. If the forest is a little more open and they're getting some sunlight, yeah, but if I had to choose, I would pick, a mountain lake with some of those like forest edges over a mountain stream with less exposure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good to know. And I often find them around here with grass, kind of mountain meadows, like you mentioned, like around the grass.
Yeah, they love edges. They love those edges.
Yeah, that's a good thing to point out.
Old logging roads and forest roads are really good here too.
Yeah, on the trails, I honestly find probably most. If there's a trail that's got that's almost dug down into ground and it's got some aspect going up on each side, like a little raised bump, and then the forest keeps going, that's where I usually find the most.
Okay. Yeah, we have like old logging roads or like fire roads that have been sort of taken over by the forests, and so there's like lots of young spruce trees that grow in them, and the Portuguese tend to love that here.
Yeah, so young growth forests. That's something I'll have to check out. I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, a mix of old with new growth.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So if you're foraging for them in the mountains, how do they kind of grow from early to late season? What elevation do you start at?
Yeah, so I tend to start at, if it's like late June, I'll start at 8,000 or so, as low as I can find spruces, with the conditions I'm looking for. July and August are sort of like fair game for the full range from, I would say, 9,000 to tree line. And at that point, it's more about finding where the newest flush is. So um, if we have a good season, we can get multiple fruitings. Like uh, a colony or a patch of mycelium might fruit multiple times in a season, and so you want to try to get it early in that fruiting, so you can get the most prime porcinis to eat. The young buttons are generally the best. So I'm going to be looking for those sort of early fruitings. And that's a hard thing to do, except for just like getting out there and seeing, like, okay, I'm in an area at 10,000 feet and I'm finding a bunch of old porcini. So maybe I need to go up 1,000 feet in the same area, or go north more to, change the latitude and sort of push the season a little later. So you can kind of control the season by changing elevation and changing latitude.
Yeah, that's a benefit of living in the mountains and also not, because I feel like it's since I moved here compared to Wisconsin, it's like really tough to get a grasp on when things are popping in what spot,
Yeah,
because it's with the elevation it can happen. It's such varying times.
totally.
Yeah, it's a good and a bad thing.
Yeah.
So I saw that you went on a backcountry foraging trip a few weeks ago on your Instagram, and you found a bunch of porcinis. And I thought you had some really unique ways of preserving them while you're on your trip. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was doing a little camping fishing trip, and I always am foraging when I can, and so that was my first personal foraging mushroom trip of the summer. And we found some nice chanterelles, which we ate immediately, and then quite a few nice porcinis that I wanted to preserve. And so I was able to put the some buttons in like a mesh bag and hang them for a couple days. I was able to get away with that, and then kind of eat them over the trip. But the ones I wanted to bring home with me, I sliced thin, and I tried two methods of drying in the field. I laid them out on fir boughs on a sunny rock, a flat rock that was exposed to sun for most of the day. And then I also strung them up and hung them between two trees in the sun. And both methods worked really well. Um, the the fir boughs on a rock, I was able to sort of get more spread out more quickly, because it's just like, as much rock as you can find essentially, but you're a little more beholden to the wind at that point. So if the wind gusts come up, you got to go collect all your mushroom chips that have blown away.
Plus squirrels, I bet, we're trying to
And
rob you.
squirrels. Yeah. The squirrels didn't bother too much. I did have a squirrel at the beginning of that trip eat through one of my like silicone cups, but they didn't bother our food too much.
Interesting. I wonder what was in that cup. Probably some good whiskey or something. No.
And it's just, I just taken it out of my bag and like wandered off to do something and came back and there were a bunch of holes chewed in it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really cool. And I think you used you didn't use fishing line. What did you use to string up the mushrooms?
It was like a braided, like a braided line. It could have been like a fishing line, or, just something pretty tough.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great idea,
Yeah, it
to do
worked
that.
great.
Yeah. Especially if you got 3 more days and you want to somehow preserve these mushrooms. So,
Totally. Yeah, it was like, I could just leave them and let them keep growing, which I did for a lot of them. I left them and I watched them slowly mature over the 4 days we were there and start going to spore and get kind of squishy and gross. And I picked a few buttons that I found and dried those, and it worked great.
can that go pretty quick? And from your experience, like, do you recommend coming back to a porcini patch, and how many days would you give it?
Yeah, yeah. If you find a porcini patch, that's all kind of older and gone to spore, it's certainly worth revisiting if the area is getting pretty good rains, in another like week or two. Um, I'd say 2 weeks maybe.
Okay. Yeah, a few days. Sweet. And then I got to ask you about, to kind of close off the porcini segment here, but what are your favorite ways to prepare this prized mushroom in the kitchen?
Yeah. The gold standard is butter. That's kind of how we cooked them growing up. Just put them in a pan with a little bit of salt, let them release their moisture, and then throw in some butter and brown them up a little bit. Um, I've also started doing water first, so I'll slice them up, put them in a pan, a little bit of water just to kind of submerge them, and then I'll cook that water off and then added fat. That works great too. Changes the texture a little bit at the end.
Interesting.
And then I think my most used way is actually porcini powder. So I'll dehydrate them, grind them into a powder, and then I'll use that as a seasoning on anything. It's great as like a small like pre-searing on a steak. Gets nice flavor and color. Goes great in eggs. It's just like a little secret umami ingredient. So it's awesome.
Yeah. And you could use your more buggy mushrooms for that potentially.
Totally. Yeah. I tend to err on like the more picky side of buggy mushrooms. And so any that are like a little too wormy to eat, fresh, I'll slice up and dry. Some people will eat way buggier mushrooms than I will.
Yeah, I'm usually like, I would say I'm an in-between. It really depends. I tend to err on the being more careful with it too, though. Yeah. I'll get my protein from my elk steak.
For sure. Sure.
Yeah. So one thing I want to mention with mushroom powder, my buddy James Mann from Spice Bush Woodcraft on Instagram, we had him on the podcast to talk about hickory nut foraging, and he had a post about using mushroom powder to form it into burger patties and then cooking those up. And that's something I really want to try.
Like only mushroom powder?
Yeah. I mean, I need to go look back at it, but I'm pretty sure all he used was mushroom powder and kind of like soak them and, pack it, kind of use it like a flour almost.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's like a mushroom flour cake.
Yeah, that would be like a real strong umami, I bet.
I feel like it would be a very powerful flavor. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Maybe mixed into the burger would be good too, like you were saying.
It is. I do that all the time. One on that same line of thinking, I haven't done it yet, but I've been considering grinding fresh mushrooms for burger patties because I have a meat grinder.
Yeah.
I was thinking that might be a cool way to grind them.
Totally.
Cook off the moisture and make patties out of them.
That would work well too, I bet. Add some eggs maybe as a binder a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, great idea. Sweet. So I think we covered the porcini pretty well. Thanks for giving us the rundown there.
For sure.
I guess one last note would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but most boletes are edible, like in some way or form. Like they are, like if they're bitter, maybe don't mess with them. If they stain, maybe don't mess with them. But is that kind of general rule?
I would say, yeah, I think most boletes are edible is a safe thing to say. The East Coast has a little bit more challenging time because and even the Midwest somewhat, their bolete diversity is just so much more than the mountains get. There are a few genera and a few species that can make you sick. We just talked about Lexinum, the scaber stalks. I recently saw someone talk about their experience eating the lilac bolete, something that grows on the East Coast, and they like a lot of field guides say it's edible, but they had like a really, really bad, severe GI upset from them, and other people sort of corroborated their experience. And then there's a few others that you don't want to eat. So I would say don't, maybe just don't like free eat any boletes. Take the time to learn them as best you can. There are some really great resources online. There's a bolete filter online that you can sort of like pick and choose traits and will help you like dial down the bolete mushrooms.
Oh, cool. Maybe you could send me that. I'd love to link that in the podcast
Yeah,
resources.
yeah. I'm pretty sure it's just called the bolete filter, but I'll
Okay.
definitely share the link with you.
Yeah. So overall, though, a pretty good,
Pretty safe group for
safe
sure.
group. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and I think it's
to
like
get into.
technically an order, volatales, maybe even larger than that, a class, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Sweet. So I don't know. Do you have to go like next 10 minutes or are we
I'm
fine
good.
to talk? Okay, cool. Because
If you're if you
I'm
don't have
fine.
a time
I,
limit, we can keep going.
yeah, no, totally. I love the deeper it gets, the better,
The
I
deep
think, for
dive.
podcasts. Yes. So one more mushroom I really wanted to talk to you about, and this also comes from a community question by a podcast listener and friend of mine, Spencer Freeling. And he said, give us the rundown on Matsutake mushrooms. One that I've been wanting to learn about more. I haven't really gotten into yet, but my understanding is it's a great summer to fall mushroom as well, right? To get into. What about him gets you excited? And I know I think you have an article on, you have a pretty cool experience, like a story around kind of finding them for the first time, right?
Yeah, yeah. So they're exciting for me because um, they are one of our like later season mushrooms, kind of late summer, fall. So that's nice to kind of, it's something that I can do while also getting into the early season hunting, which is really fun. And then they sort of get that like with morels that are sort of like they take some extra effort to find. They're not just like bright, stand out. It's like you can see them a mile away. You gotta kind of really hone in. They tend to always be covered and only produce what are called mushrumps by most mushroomers, which are just like bumps or cracks in the forest floor that sort of hint that there might be something underneath. And so my experience with these was in Colorado, our Matsutake species, which is the Western Matsutake, Tricholoma murrellianum, tend to only grow. My understanding was they tended to only grow with lodgepole pine. And lodgepole pine is a forest type, a tree type that tends to be sort of boring to be in my opinion. Lodgepole pine are very, straight growing trees. Their limbs tend to be pretty high up. There's very little understory growth, so it's sort of like a lot of sameness. They're often kind of drier than some of the other forest types, so the mushroom diversity is a lot lower. And so it's just a forest type that I just, with my limited time to look for mushrooms, I didn't choose first. I was always, getting into the spruce firs, looking for all these other species we've talked about and others. And so the sort of turning point for me was I was scouting at the end of August for a foray that I was leading for a mycological society, and it was an area that I hadn't been to. Oh, did you hear that big thunder?
Yeah. Oh, I'm jealous. It's so hot in
uh,
my room here.
yeah, getting some rain this evening. It was an area that I hadn't really been to previously. I just went up, picked a spot, parked, and took a walk. I was with my dog, and we found some. It was kind of a drier year, not the best mushroom year that year. I found some honey mushrooms and a few other species that I was excited to show the foray. And on my way out, which is my normal uh, mo, is instead of taking the trail, I'll get off trail and just like meander back so that I'm away from other people and can just sort of experience the forest and see what else there is to find. I rarely am a trail hiker. I'm usually off, wandering through the woods,
That's where the
bushwhacking.
gold is.
Yeah, yeah, it's more fun. It's just you get to find your own things, make your own way. And so I was wandering back, and I kept running into this group of Japanese people that were picking mushrooms. I could see that they were obviously picking mushrooms, just their behavior. They had bags, like canvas tote bags, and they had these tools that were essentially like garden tools on the end of like longer, like broom handles, almost like an extended weed picker or an extended trowel that they were like using as walking sticks and also like checking for mushrooms. And I knew enough about Matsutake to understand that that was what they were looking for. Um, so there were a couple interesting things. One, they were in a subalpine fir and lodgepole pine mixed forest, which is, one of our like typical mixed conifer forest in Colorado. And I noticed that they were mostly focused on the fir trees instead of the lodgepole. And so I approached them after sort of interacting, like crossing paths a few times. I approached and was like, "Hey, I'm picking mushrooms too. I had a few in my bag." I showed them my honey mushrooms, and I think I had a couple of milk caps or something. And I was like, "You're picking Matsutake, right? Can I watch you?" And there was a language barrier there, but they sort of nodded and like pulled out a couple Matsutake out of their bag and showed me. And I was like, pretty excited to sort of observe them, and they didn't seem put off by it. So I just sort of stuck with them for a few minutes and watched them like systematically. It was a group of, I think, 5, and they were spread through the forest, maybe 2 or 300 yards. And they would like systematically hit every fir tree. Um, and they would call out to each other, kind of verbally check in and sort of like move through the forest in this like wave. And they had these tools, and under every tree, they would sort of like put it in and pop any sort of like potential mushroom. And so looking back, I could see all of these like squared off like tool marks in the ground that I had previously thought were squirrels, but I could see like the difference between like a rounded hole and a square hole. Um, so I could tell like all of the trees that these people had hit going
It's like
through.
those squirrels, they know geometry,
Yeah, yeah, digging square holes. And so I watched them do that for a while. I watched the trees they were looking for. I looked at the sort of like the general forest cover they were looking at. They often would visit like decaying logs. Were hitting every fir tree. And, I sort of like let them get in front of me, and then I circled way up and around them, sort of out of their range, and started kind of using what I had observed to see if I could find my own. And I did end up finding a couple Matsutake after watching them. The very first one I found was this tiny little Matsutake that had like, it was growing on this like dried out kind of ridge top. And so there wasn't much forest cover for it to grow under. So it was just sort of emerged. So I got like a very easy one for my first one. And then I found like 4 or 5 more that were actually covered. And we ended up crossing paths a few more times that day, and I showed them the Matsutake I found, and then we were actually parked right next to each other. So we sort of, bid our farewells and good lucks and moved on. And the next day we came back in, and I taught the class. I told the class about that experience and taught them what I learned, and we found a bunch more Matsutake.
That's
And
awesome.
so, yeah, every year now I am more open to searching in lodgepole pine forests because I know that a good Matsutake year can be a really amazing experience in a lodgepole forest. And I also look in fir forests too, because I kind of have a couple spots where the Matsutake grow with the firs, which are really fun. Because then I can also find milk caps and chanterelles and porcinis and hawkswangs, kind of do it all at the same time.
Yeah, that's such a cool story, man. I mean, for one, just that they were so open to sharing uh their, letting you watch and all that, and that with the language barrier and everything, and knowing mushroom hunters that like they can be pretty hostile.
Yeah,
So
they were efficient. Like it was impressive, and they had full bags.
yeah,
So
that's cool. Yeah, and then yeah, hearing about the tools and whatnot, that's
mhm.
that deep kind of culture, kind of what we're talking
Yeah,
about with the Ukraine, like Eastern European people. They know to,
totally.
yeah, they know to look beyond even the bounds that the books might talk about and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's get into like what they look like here quick, because I think you uploaded some pictures of those too, right?
I did, yeah, they're, a really cool mushroom. They like I said, they grow mostly underneath the forest floor, so they're kind of covered.
Maybe we start with this
They
one.
are Yeah, this is a great kind of representation of different life stages. So, they start as little buttons, they have a veil, so their gills are covered initially. Um, they're generally white and a little bit like they have this, like, almost fuzzy layer that you can kinda seal, like, peeling off of it there. And then they have this cinnamon brown coloration it's kind of streaky and not very consistent, but it's there.
Almost like scaly a bit.
A little scaly looking, yeah, but when you feel them, it's like this, like, almost felty layer that will peel off. Their gills are, attached at a notch, usually, and, their caps also have that same, like, kind of streaky cinnamon brown coloration, and
When
then
when you say real quick, when you say attached on a notch, what do you mean by that?
yeah, so the stem, where the gills come in, instead of coming in straight or coming in and, like, growing down the stem, they meet at a little notch, so there's, like, a little groove where the gills, like, dip down before they connect.
Okay, got it.
So, yeah, I think it's, the technical term is adnate, but there's, like, a little notch where the gills connect to the stem. And that's an indicative feature. And then on the base of their stem, they always have this gray, sandy soil, which is called podazole or podazole or spodazole, something like that. Spodazole, I think, is the
Is it something they produce or is it just dirt?
no, it's a soil type that they grow in. So it's like a
Okay,
sandy, it's almost like an ashy, sandy gray soil.
that's
And
cool.
so they always have it. I have another picture of one that's kind of very clearly, you can see this,
Yeah,
the
this one?
spodazole, the second one over,
Oh
or the
yeah,
next one over.
Spodosol. Next one over.
Spodazole, yep. So you
Is
can
it?
see that, like,
Yeah,
ashy gray sand, um, and that's they always grow in that. So if you can pinpoint that soil type, by either maybe some soil maps are available for your forests, or you can dig down and find that, like, sandy layer, then you're in the right spot for Matsutake.
that's good to know. That's
And
a
then
great tip.
most importantly, yeah, their smell. They smell like funky cinnamon. It's like some people call it like hot sauce and sweat. It's very resinous and earthy and totally unique. And it's one of the reasons they're so prized because of that super unique smell.
Hot sauce and sweat sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's like this. I think it's like a funky cinnamon candy, like a hot tamale or a
Oh yeah,
fireball, but it's like a funky fermented earthy version of it.
I can get down with that.
Yeah,
That
it's
sounds
very
good.
unique.
And so I brought up the picture again of the different life stages. I've definitely found mushrooms that look like with the webbing. Are there other mushrooms that look very similar to that?
Yeah, so there's quite a few Matsutake lookalikes. A lot of them are also Tricholoma. The most common here in Colorado are Tricholoma focale, or focal. They're more of an orangey streaked mushroom. They're not toxic. They just are kind of not good tasting.
Are they one of the ones you have in the pictures here?
Yeah, the necklace trick.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah. So they're more of like a consistent orange color, but they grow in the same habitats in the same ways. They're pretty closely related to Matsutake.
Here's another
But
picture of the bottom.
yeah, way more orange versus that, like, streaky cinnamon brown.
Also edible or
They
bad look
are
like?
safe, but not good,
Okay,
like
just
bitter or
bitter.
just like off tasting. As far as I understand, I've never eaten them.
Cool. And then we also have the Imperial Cat. Is that another lookalike?
Imperial cat, that's another look-alike. These are edible. These you can see have decurrent gills, so the gills run down the stem. They grow with spruce and fir instead of lodgepole and fir here, and then they have a double ring. So you can see very obviously on this one, there's the ring that goes upwards, and then a little bit below that, there's another ring zone on the stem. And these are edible. They're a pretty tasty mushroom. They have a very dense, stout texture, so they're nice. Almost like maybe a shiitake equivalent in terms of texture, at least. So I really enjoyed the imperial Cataphalasma. So this genus is Cataphalasma. The species Imperiale here. These, yeah, they're sometimes called the mock Sutake, so MOCK Sutake.
I like that.
Yeah.
It almost looks like, at least when we're looking at it, the picture here, it looks like it's sitting in a potato sack, with
It
that
kind of
second ring.
does, yeah. It kind of does look like that.
Yeah, it's got like a sock over it almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any potentially like really dangerous lookalikes that you're aware of?
So not in Colorado. In the west, on the west coast, where they have a lot of Matsutake as well. They have a few Amanita species. Specifically, I think it's Smith's Amanita that can be confused with Matsutake. They grow in the same habitats, and that one is toxic. But in Colorado, yeah, they're very safe in terms of lookalikes. The lookalikes are either non-toxic or edible, but they are more of an intermediate species in terms of like the skill it takes to positively find and identify them. We have one other group of lookalikes called Tricholoma caligatum, and that's another like species complex that some are edible and some are not.
Okay. Definitely one where that requires a little bit more research too.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
the webbing though, that I found some around here that look just like this, but they're like slightly purple.
Those are probably Cortinarius, if I had to guess.
Cortinarius, yes. That's what
Yep.
I remember looking up to.
Yep. So the tricoloma, these matsutakis are going to be totally white, and then that cinnamon brown streaking. And instead of like the web, which is the cortina that gives the Cortinarius its name, it's more of like almost like a felt. It's like a fuzzy, actual true veil. It's not like a webbed veil.
Can you poke through it? Is
You
it
yeah, you can
an air
break
pocket?
it. You can break it. Yep, there's space between the gills and the
Okay. That's good to know. Cool. Yeah, such a cool mushroom. I will have to definitely try to find it. And when do you think they kind of end usually in your area?
I would say our season is probably like early mid-August to, in the best years, maybe early mid-October.
Okay.
But like late August, early September is probably like peak Matsutake season.
Great. So I'm trying to get this podcast here out as fast as possible after we record it. So maybe it might be still worth for people
Yeah, it might still be
to
worth
look
getting
for
out
them.
there.
If not
It's worth
next
it
year.
anyways. It's worth it anyways, even if it's,
Very true.
late season. Don't go out in the winter looking for mushrooms. I mean,
Yeah.
there are a few around, but
Yeah, that's a rare thing.
October's worth it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So let's see. I think we talked about ID factors, what time they grow, tips for finding them. I mean, you talked about the fir and lodgepole pine. Are there any like specific features you look for when you try to find Matsutake?
That's that soil type. The podosol is really important, or spodosol. They tend to there's a little bit of a mix. So in the lodgepole forests, they tend to like a little bit more of an open lodgepole forest in my experience. So lodgepole can grow really dense and kind of hard to even move through, and they prefer the more healthy kind of wider spread stands. They get a little sunlight.
Right.
And then in the fir, I often find them growing in moss under fir, like underneath moss.
Mm-hmm. So kind of it seems like it's a mushroom. You kind of got to look for the little cracks and peel some things.
Sometimes it's like just a little crack in the surface. So it takes a little bit more attention to really nail down.
I'm pretty sure I've seen them because I with the guild ones, I still have a lot of learning to do, and I usually just take pictures and move on. But they just look, because the cracks, like I've definitely found them like that where they're just kind of popping out and barely visible. And I think I remember reading that they also like to be around logs, like downed logs, deadfall.
I've seen that, a little bit. Especially like old rotted logs, they'll grow, in that duff sometimes.
Yeah, cool, love it. So, how any special way to cook these, or keeping it simple here too?
You definitely want to keep it simple for the Matsutake. focus on cooking methods that are gentle and meant to sort of preserve that flavor. So traditionally, they'd be steamed with rice or done in like a light soup broth. Um, anything you can think of that would capture that funky essence that they have. A hard sear, you might lose some of that like gentle flavor, and then you just have the matsutake texture, which is also good. Last time I found a really big haul, I made pickles. I sliced them really thin, pickled them, which was really good, and then I infused shoyu, which was actually my favorite way to preserve their flavor. So I just sliced them thin, put them in a jar with Japanese soy sauce, and let it sit. I still have it in my fridge, actually.
Really? So that the soy sauce kind of preserves the flavor, even though soy can be, it's
Yeah, the
pretty
soy sauce
strong
like
flavor.
pulls in that a little bit of that funky matsutake, scent and flavor, and it becomes infused. And then, you can use the mushrooms out of the soy as well as the soy sauce itself.
Love it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Spencer, if you're listening, I hope we covered the Matsutake enough for you. Anything else you want to say about them, or do you think we covered them good?
I think that's as much as I know. I'm still learning them myself.
Yeah, and you did just drop an article recently, right, about
I
them?
did, yeah, this earlier this week, actually.
Yeah,
Maybe last
and
week.
anyone listening right now, definitely check out all of Orion's articles on foragecolorado.com. Great stuff. You do a really
Thank you.
good job.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I really like him. Now, kind of pivoting into preservation a bit, I'm always curious to hear from foragers like yourself, what preservation methods you use. You hear drying and freezing a lot, but are there maybe any lesser known preservation methods that you've kind of played around with?
Yeah, drying and freezing are great, kind of my stand-ins for sure that I mostly use. I've been experimenting a little bit more recently with freezing raw. So especially with porcinis, I'll slice up the buttons and freeze them raw. And
Mm.
then the trick with it is to cook them frozen. So pull them out of the packages, let them thaw maybe 10 minutes, just enough to like break them up or cut them up, and then cook them frozen. If you let them thaw first, they release all their moisture. So it's a really great way to preserve a lot of porcinis quickly if you get a big haul and you need to freeze them quick. And it's about the closest way I've found to getting a fresh porcini preserved. So
That's good to
definitely
know.
would recommend that. Yeah, and I think that method of freezing and then cooking frozen would work with a lot of mushrooms. Um,
Yeah.
the pickling I just mentioned with the matsutake, pickling works great with, a lot of different mushrooms. I would recommend these smaller buttons if you're gonna pickle, or slice them thin maybe. Um,
Have you
talked
tried
about Go ahead.
have you tried canning at all, like pressure canning?
I haven't done any pressure canning. No. I'm curious to get into that. I've done a lot of water bath canning, with like acidic things, but not pressure canning yet. I'm interested in it though. I also talked about salt pressing mushrooms earlier. That's probably something that could be expanded into other types of mushrooms. Infusing into things like soy sauce or maybe alcohol. I know people that make chanterelle brandy
Oh,
sometimes.
that's cool.
Yeah. So fun ways to sort of infuse and capture those flavors. Um, and then mushroom fermentation is something I've started experimenting with a little bit. It requires there's a few different ways to do it. The way that I use is was taught to me by Pascal Bader, who's like my fermentation guru mentor. And he will steam the mushrooms first and then ferment them in a brine, like maybe a sauerkraut brine or a kimchi
Mm,
brine. And we'll add different flavors to sort of change the ferment. And that's a really fun way to preserve mushrooms. And then from there, you can use the brine, which has a lot of earthy mushroom flavors, and you can use the mushrooms either fresh, because they've been steamed, or you can cook them again to change the texture and flavor, or you could blend them into a puree, and then you get this like really complex, funky mushroom puree.
that's
So
a
there's a
good
lot of
idea too.
options there. Yeah. And then probably my favorite that I do maybe every handful of years is the oil marinated mushrooms.
Yeah.
There's a Hank Shaw recipe that I mostly use, but it's like it's a very labor intensive method, but it's, boil them in like a light vinegar solution, slightly dry them, and then put them in an oil marinade, and they become this like beautiful, like slightly chewy, oily, vinegary. They're absolutely delicious, but they
Great
are a
with
lot
like
of work.
great with charcuterie.
Hmm.
My half of my family's from Italy, and my Italian grandma told me about how she used to do that. So I tried it with chanterelles, and the little button chanterelles work great for that.
It's excellent. Yeah,
Yeah.
chanterelles, hedgehogs would be great. Porcini are wonderful. Any of those sort of slightly denser mushrooms.
Yeah. Totally. All great tips. I've yet to explore the whole mushroom fermentation. That's a whole new world for me too.
Yeah, it's still pretty new for me, but I'm super interested in it.
Yeah. That sounds great. 'Cause, chanterelles, along the lines of preservation, I've heard that I've never frozen them. People say that when you freeze them, they get bitter. Have you experienced that?
No, no. I've frozen a ton of chanterelles, and that's my preferred method for preserving chanterelles. So I will cook them either a dry saute or like simply in butter or oil, and then I'll freeze them in vacuum packs. No bitterness that I've ever noticed, and I've been doing that, pretty much my whole mushroom picking life. I don't really dry chanterelles. I have dried them in the past, and I have some dried actually in our pantry now, but they tend to lose a lot of their flavor and become kind of rubbery or tough when they're dried. So I
Yeah.
almost always freeze them.
Yeah. I need to start doing that because I usually dry, and I've heard the same from friends now. They do, I do feel like they lose a bit of their flavor that way. And how I've been doing it is I dry them and then I wrap them in paper towel and vacuum seal them. But
Mhm.
that also isn't the best because the vacuum sealing often kind of breaks them, when
Totally.
it's sucking all that air out.
Yeah, I
Um,
would definitely recommend cooking and freezing. It's a great way to preserve chanterelles. At least the
cool.
rainbow chanterelles that we have in the Rockies.
Yeah, I'll have to try that. So sticking along the preservation cooking, path, I guess, are there any other fun ways you've been exploring for cooking mushrooms that we haven't covered? Anything unique?
Unique, I tend to fall back on like the simple
Yeah,
often. Just preserve like let their flavor, their uniqueness shine. Cook them
totally.
simply, saute them and serve them as a side. Last winter, and I'm sure this winter, I have a ton of dried mushrooms, and so I'll do more like soups and stews. One of my favorite recipes last year or 2 years ago was this really simple, like traditional Thanksgiving stew that I made. That was part of a promotion that the Wild Turkey Federation was doing, and it was sort of like a challenge to do a meal that would be closer to like a traditional Thanksgiving meal with wild ingredients. So I used a few different wild mushrooms and dehydrated wild mushrooms that I rehydrated for my broth. So I just put them in a bowl with boiling hot water and let them slowly rehydrate and leach their flavor into the water. And then I did elk and squash and wild rice, and then did that broth with the mushrooms and just let it simmer. And
You're talking
yeah,
my language now.
it was one of the favorite meals. They're so simple, just very simple seasoning,
I'm
lots of
totally
wild
with you
ingredients.
there. Like the whole theme of of how we cook is simple, let
Yeah,
those flavors shine, especially with wild foods and even stuff you grow at home. Just produces way better flavors than what you're gonna get at the grocery store. And
totally.
why hide it?
Yeah.
Let it shine by itself. I totally agree with all that. Sweet. So I guess my last question would be, with increasing interest in foraging for wild foods, how do you see kind of the future of mushroom foraging evolving? Are there any trends or changes you foresee?
Yeah, I think, it's mushrooms are certainly having their moment in the limelight, the mainstream for sure there, and I think that will continue. Over the last 5 years, I've seen the growth and interest in mushrooms just explode, which is really cool. It's something that I've cared about for my whole life, and to see more people interested in learning about them and eating them is really exciting for me. I think one thing we are going to see is uh, more people probably making mistakes. I've been hearing online of people that aren't doing their research of, they're getting excited and they're picking mushrooms they shouldn't be picking and eating mushrooms they shouldn't be eating. I see it a lot of just people that, get too excited and then just don't do their homework and eat the wrong thing and get a little bit ill. So, I would encourage people that are interested in mushroom foraging to take your time and pick a few species, maybe some of the ones we recommended earlier, and, learn them really well. And, it is inherently a safe practice. Mushroom foraging is a lot safer than plant foraging. There are no toxic to touch mushrooms. There are, way fewer deadly toxic mushrooms. It's generally safer. So it's not something you need to be afraid of, but it's still something to take your time with and sort of commit to learning, not, not looking for that instant gratification. So, I think aside from that, I'm excited to see what in the mycology side of things as we progress and learn more, what sort of taxonomic revelations we have as we learn more about some of these obscure genera, like Cortinarius or Restula that we talked about. These ones that have hundreds or thousands of species that just sort of are like, those are hard to identify. I'm going to not eat those because I can't get them to the species level.
Yeah.
And I think in the next few years, we're going to see a lot more information coming out as those are studied.
Yeah, that would be cool. Got to buy new books then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that book right there, that white one, is all about Agaricus of North America. It's only about Agaricus. It's like a encyclopedia book.
Yeah, that's something beginners can look forward to, is just nerding out, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I always say once you go down the wild food rabbit hole, like you'll never get bored again because there's so much to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You will never learn it all.
No. That's why, again, find your group of people you can share with, and you join your Patreon, and I know you have a Discord group and all that, and we'll plug that in a sec here. I think in general, I wonder if there'll be more restrictions as more people go to the woods, in terms of how many mushrooms you can collect and all that.
I think we are seeing that a little bit, and I think that will continue to sort of evolve. My day job is in natural resources, in a state government position, so I sort of get both aspects of it. I see some of that from the other side, and the problem with it is not the picking of mushrooms, although some people mistakenly think that picking mushrooms is damaging, but it's generally not. It's the loss of habitat of multiple people kind of walking in the same path and creating social trails. And earlier I said that I'm an off trail person, but I do it in a very respectful way. I don't take the same path over and over again for the most part. I'm being very conscious of where I'm stepping, and I know which species are potentially sensitive and which habitats to be careful around. So I think that kind of goes with the same, like, don't jump in too quickly. Take your time to sort of understand how to approach it respectfully, and we definitely are going to see some more restrictions in some areas for sure, that are more stemming from protecting the entire resource for everyone who wants to enjoy it, and not just targeting foragers, although oftentimes those restrictions will look like they're targeting foragers.
Yeah, that's a good point. And hopefully, the more people learn about this, the more they hear long form podcasts like this and just get into the world of foraging. They also built that appreciation for the rest of the environment around the edibles, So
yeah, that's my hope, that the growth and interest creates changes for the better of all. because we care so deeply about these resources, we want to see them last for generations. And so taking that approach can lead to management that is beneficial for both sides. It allows for other recreators and other resources to flourish while also letting foragers and mushroom hunters, do the things that they love. And I think a really great example before we end is, the two acts that sort of pay for a ton of outdoor recreation in both hunting and fishing. Like hunters and fishermen definitely contribute the most monetary for conservation and restoration efforts compared to any other form of outdoor recreation because there are taxes built into hunting and fishing gear inherently.
Ammo, all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
The licenses.
seeing some more of that like approach of allowing the people that care about the resource to fund the preservation of the resource, I think would also be a step in the right direction for having this last.
Totally. Yeah. Pittman's Robertson Act and Dingle Johnson for fishing.
Yep, you got him. I always get them
Yeah.
confused.
Yeah. Yeah. Huge. That's a really good point to bring up that a lot of people don't even know about. And, I'm hoping we'll also have a tax on maybe just hiking backpacks and stuff, because
Yeah, I think there'd be a lot of pushback on it, but it's such an important and growing interest. Like in Colorado, this is a bit of a tangent, but in the last few years, we've seen a lot of popular trailheads start to shut down and require reservations and planning just because they're so popular. They're like hundreds of cars going to these parking lots and overflowing into private property and just causing issues. And so creating a way for the people that are just interested in hiking and experiencing to give back in the same way that hunters and fishermen do would be beneficial, I think.
Totally. Yep. Cool. Well, Orion, this has been absolutely awesome. Thank you for sitting down now for 2 hours with me.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people, yeah, I think a lot of people will get some really good info out of this one, especially e-scouting for mushrooms. That is one you don't really hear people talk about. But why not? It can help you save a lot of time, especially if I think it's more applicable in kind of the mountainous terrain, but even for people in the Midwest and whatnot. So
sure.
where can people learn more about your educational content and just connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me either at Forage Colorado or Orion Aon on all the major social medias that are picture or video based. And I'm not a Twitter Xer user, but I'm on all the others. And then my website, foragecolorado.com. I also have, as mentioned a little earlier, a Discord group that is pretty calm. Not too many people in there, but whenever somebody posts something in there, I'm in there immediately responding to it. We've got some identification channels. If someone's interested in joining a Discord that I run and has some like-minded people in it, you can check that out on my website. And then I do also have a Patreon that supports my work and gives you access to my foraging calendar and some of my other kind of more exclusive, heavier efforts in the foraging education space. But I have a lot of free. All my other content is free and equally educational. It's just not so kind of collated and focused. So
yeah, no, I love it all. I'm a big fan of your stuff, so keep it up. Great work there. And I'll link all of that in the podcast episode description. Either you can send it to me or I'll just find it myself. I've been on.
Sure.
I joined a Discord group recently, so excited to check that out a bit more.
Yeah, start posting stuff in there. It's
yeah.
I don't have the time to post daily, but anytime somebody does, I'm in there chatting. So
yeah, people underestimate how long all this content creation stuff takes. So I'm definitely support his work. Check out my Patreon. I'm not as built out as you yet in terms of what to offer, but it's all a journey, and I'm excited to the main focus again, mission, just help build more resilient people through food.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Patreons don't need to be too crazy. Mine is I'm the type of like what else can I provide? What else can I provide? But I think people just want to support, the creators that they connect with and care about. So I also tell myself try to not to overthink it sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Cool. Well, good luck on the rest of your mushroom foraging season here,
You too.
and hunting season. Hopefully, you get your elk that you're looking for. Have you gotten an elk before?
I have. Yep, I've gotten one with my rifle and one with my bow.
Nice. I've only gotten one so far with the rifle, and hoping to get my first bow elk this year. I've only lived in Montana since 2021 now, so it's been deer hunting for a long time, but elk hunting is a whole new thing for me. You should check out I did a recent podcast on elk hunting with Kenneth from Kifaru, and he's a
Nice.
he's a slayer. He last year got 4 elk with a bow. Yeah, well, 1 was with a rifle, I think, and 3 with a bow, and I'm like, Jesus. Whole nother level. But again,
That's
it
impressive.
all goes back to what you're obsessed with, and you can't can't be the best at everything, right? Yeah,
you can't. I'm a big generalist for sure when it comes to hunting.
Yeah, same here. It is the thing I do like to focus on the most because of the amount of food I get and quality of food. But the foraging is just so special too, and there's just so much still to explore and teach and learn. Cool.
Yeah, I've put in quite a bit of effort for hunting for the last 10 years, and every year I've had a tag, I've filled at least one of those tags.
Heck yeah.
The years that I don't, it's because I've already filled a couple others.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky in that way that I've got some bait spots, and I'm able to get at least a deer every year. So.
Right, and now it should be easier for you with elk too, since Colorado got rid of those over-the-counter tags. less people.
Those big changes for sure.
Yeah.
My buddy and I spent a few points on these tags, so we'll see. We're going in kind of blind.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We'll have to do it again sometime. Talk about the other side of things.
I'd love to.